massive, complex machine, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? A sort of constitutional transformer switch.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because under normal circumstances, it operates as this sprawling, intricate network. Power is distributed evenly, everyone shares the load. And, in the context of India, you're looking at this immense federal structure. Power is shared between New Delhi and dozens of state capitals, managing over 1 billion people.
Right. A classic federal setup.
Exactly. But the moment a critical existential crisis hits, someone flips a switch. And instantly, with mechanical precision, the whole structure just morphs.
All that federal power gets sucked right back to the center.
Yeah. The network shuts down, and a single unified command center takes total control of the entire country.
It is a really striking image, and the crazy part is we aren't talking about science fiction here. This is the actual, literal legal mechanics of the world's largest democracy.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The Constitution of India allows the country to shift completely from a federal republic into a strictly unitary state. I mean, the central government can assume near total authority, and it can do this without passing a single constitutional amendment.
And that massive structural shift is exactly what we're mastering today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
So our mission today is highly specific and honestly extremely high stakes, especially if you are prepping for competitive exams, like the UPSC, state PSCs, or SSC. We are taking a magnifying glass to Part 8 of the Indian Constitution, the emergency provisions, which covers Articles 352 through 360.
Yeah, and consider this deep dive your secret weapon for those exams.
Absolutely.
Sure.
We're breaking down the authoritative text to explore the actual mechanics of these powers, the constitutional traps that examiners just love to test, and the profound philosophy behind all of it.
Because it is vital to move beyond just memorizing the article numbers. On paper, Chapter 17 can look incredibly dry, right?
Oh, totally. Just procedural timelines and legal jargon.
Exactly. But beneath that legal language is the power to literally suspend normal democratic life. To master this for your exams, you really have to understand the dilemma the Constitution's framers faced.
Right. They were dealing with a newly independent India.
Yeah, and they knew the country would face these monumental, totally unpredictable challenges. So to protect the republic in a time of absolute crisis, they needed a built-in mechanism to centralize power fast. A constitutional panic button, basically.
But they were also hyper-aware that a panic button of that magnitude needed, immense disciplinary checks.
Oh, completely. Because without those checks, you don't have a safety mechanism. You just have a blueprint for a dictatorship.
Right. So before we look at how the Constitution tries to leash this power, we need to understand the heaviest artillery the central government has, and that is the national emergency under Article 352.
So Article 352 is triggered by 3 very specific grounds. 2 of them fall under what we call an external emergency, which are war or external aggression.
Okay, war and external aggression.
Right. And the third ground is an internal emergency, which is triggered by armed rebellion.
Now, there's a really crucial constitutional reality here about the timing, which is an exam favorite. The threat doesn't have to be actively destroying the country for the switch to be flipped.
No, not at all.
The president can declare a national emergency if they are satisfied that a real danger is just imminent. So if an armed rebellion or a foreign invasion is right on the horizon, the center doesn't have to wait for the first shot to be fired.
Which makes sense, right? That anticipatory power is totally essential for national defense. You can't just wait around. But let's look at the actual procedural timeline, because the mechanics of how this gets approved are heavily scrutinized in these exams.
Yes, let's break that down.
So the president makes the proclamation. However, they can only do this upon receiving the formal written advice of the cabinet.
Written advice. That's a huge keyword right there.
Exactly. And we'll get into the historical significance of that specific word written a bit later. But once the president proclaims it, the clock immediately starts ticking. Parliament must step in and approve it within 1 month.
And getting that approval is deliberately difficult. The authoritative texts highlight that this requires a special majority.
Yes, a special majority.
So for anyone trying to lock this down conceptually for their prep, let's define what that actually means in practice, because it's a massive legislative hurdle compared to normal day-to-day business.
It really is. A standard law usually just needs a simple majority, meaning more than half of the members who just happen to be present voting that day.
Right.
But a special majority under Article 352 is way more rigorous. It requires a majority of the total membership of the House, regardless of who is absent, and majority of not less than 2/3 of the members who are present and voting.
Wow, okay, so it demands an overwhelming, undeniable consensus that the nation is actually in peril.
Exactly. You have 1 month to get that overwhelming 2/3 consensus. And once Parliament clears that hurdle, the emergency is locked in for 6 months.
6 months. It can be extended, right?
Yeah, it could be extended indefinitely, actually. And this is but it's not a set it and forget it scenario. Parliament has to reconvene and pass that special majority all over again every 6 months to keep it active.
So they are forced to constantly justify the suspension of normal federalism.
Precisely. And the effects on that federalism are pretty much absolute. The central government gains the power to direct any state on how to exercise its executive power.
Parliament can just step in and pass laws on the state list.
Yeah, subjects strictly designated to the states are suddenly fair game for the center. The president can even alter the constitutionally mandated distribution of revenues between the center and the states.
Going back to our analogy, it's like the central brain just completely overrides the nervous system of the states. The federal boundaries basically become porous.
That's a great way to put it.
But if the center becomes this all-powerful brain, the immediate question for any citizen, definitely for any exam candidate, is, wait, what happens to my fundamental rights? Like, if Parliament is suddenly unbound, do those rights just vanish?
That is where the constitutional nuance gets incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Your rights don't just vanish into thin air, but they are severely curtailed. And understanding the distinction between Article 358 and Article 359 is absolutely essential here.
Okay, let's pull apart Article 358 first, because this one acts almost like an automatic reflex, right?
Yeah, automatic is the perfect word. It deals exclusively with Article 19, which guarantees the 6 fundamental freedoms, freedom of speech and expression, peaceful assembly, movement throughout the country, things like that.
Right.
When a national emergency is declared, Article 358 kicks in and just automatically suspends those 6 freedoms. The government doesn't even need to issue a separate order. It's baked right into the declaration.
However, and this is a massive exam trap, there's a critical caveat that was introduced later on. Those Article 19 freedoms are only automatically suspended if the emergency is declared on the grounds of war or external aggression.
Yes.
If the government declares an internal emergency because of armed rebellion within the country, Article 358 does not trigger. Your freedom of speech and assembly actually remain constitutionally intact.
That is such a brilliant distinction to keep in mind. War means speech can be curtailed automatically. Armed rebellion means Article 19 survives.
Right. But that only covers those 6 specific freedoms. What happens to the rest of the fundamental rights?
So that's where Article 359 comes into play. It's much broader in scope, but it requires deliberate action. It allows the president to issue a specific separate order suspending the right of citizens to move any court for the enforcement of the fundamental rights specified in that order.
Okay, so the right itself isn't technically erased from the text of the Constitution, but your ability to go to a high court or the Supreme Court to demand a remedy is gone. The legal doors are just locked.
Exactly. Which, practically speaking, means the state can infringe upon those rights without any immediate judicial consequence.
That's terrifying. But the Constitution does draw a hard line in the sand, doesn't it? Even under the sleeping powers of Article 359, Articles 20 and 21 are ironclad.
Absolutely ironclad. The protection against arbitrary conviction under Article 20 and the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 can never be suspended. Never.
So they act as the ultimate failsafe. No matter how bad things get, the state cannot strip a citizen of their basic right to life and liberty without due process.
Right. It ensures a baseline of human dignity remains untouchable.
And just to ground all this heavy theory in reality for our listeners, this Article 352 sledgehammer has actually been deployed 3 times since independence.
Yes. During the 1962 war with China, the 1971 war with Pakistan, and of course the highly controversial 1975 internal emergency.
So Article 352 is for those existential threats to the entire republic. But what happens when the threat is localized? Say, like, just one single state's political machinery completely breaks down. The center doesn't need to lock down the whole country, but it does need to step in.
Right. And that specific scenario is governed by Article 356. Famously known as President's Rule.
Ah, President's Rule.
Yes. This is triggered when the president, usually after getting a report from the state's governor, is satisfied that the government of that state basically cannot be carried on in accordance with the Constitution. It's a failure of constitutional machinery at the state level.
And there's a deeply consequential mechanism attached to this that catches people off guard all the time in exams. Article 365.
Oh, the hidden trapdoor.
Exactly. It acts as a hidden trapdoor for state governments. If a state simply defies or fails to comply with lawful directions from the center, Article 365 makes it perfectly lawful for the president to assume that the state's constitutional machinery has failed.
Literally, just ignoring New Delhi can trigger president's rule.
It's a stark reminder of the ultimate unitary tilt of the Indian Federation. Now, structurally, if we contrast this with Article 352 to help you memorize it, the process for enacting president's rule is noticeably easier.
Oh, much easier. Parliament has a longer window here, 2 months instead of 1 to approve it. And crucially, it only requires a simple majority. You don't need that demanding special majority we talked about for national emergencies.
Which makes it far more accessible as a political tool, and once it's approved by that simple majority, it lasts for 6 months.
Right.
But unlike the national emergency, which can theoretically just roll on forever with 6-month renewals, president's rule hits a hard wall. There is a strict maximum limit of 3 years.
Yeah, and the reason for that difference is key. A national emergency addresses an unpredictable threat, like a war. Wars don't respect parliamentary timetables.
Yeah.
But president's rule addresses a localized political breakdown. The 3-year hard stop exists to prevent the central government from permanently disenfranchising the voters of that specific state. The goal is to restore order, hold fresh elections, and hand power back. They can't just govern a state directly forever.
But during those 3 years, the effects are massive. The president assumes the executive functions, the state assembly might be dissolved, and parliament takes over passing laws and the budget for that state.
And historically, this isn't a rare occurrence at all. The records show president's rule has been imposed over 100 times.
Over 100 times.
Yeah. For example, in 1973, during the Jai Andhra agitation, political instability led to Andhra Pradesh being placed directly under central control. It's a lived reality.
Because it only needs a simple majority, and it's been used so frequently. I mean, it naturally raises concerns about abuse, right?
Definitely. For decades, there were intense debates about the center using Article 356 to dismiss certain governments run by opposing political parties, just because they were inconvenient, not because of an actual breakdown.
But the Supreme Court eventually stepped in to build a guardrail around this. This is a massive so what moment for anyone studying this. The landmark S.R. Bommai case in 1994.
The Bommai judgment was an absolute watershed moment. The Supreme Court ruled that Article 356 is absolutely subject to judicial review.
So the courts can actually examine whether the central government's proclamation was based on relevant material or if it was mollified, like done in bad faith.
Exactly. And if the court finds the dismissal was unconstitutional, it actually has the power to restore the dissolved state assembly to life.
The court also addressed how a governor actually determines if a state government has lost its majority, didn't they?
Yes, and this is huge. Before Bommai, a governor might just subjectively decide, oh, the chief minister doesn't have the numbers anymore, and recommend president's rule based on behind-the-scenes maneuvering.
Right.
But the Supreme Court mandated that a government's majority must be tested where it actually matters, on the floor of the legislative house. You have to literally call a vote in the assembly.
That floor test requirement fundamentally stabilized state politics. And it really cemented federalism as part of the Constitution's basic structure. The central government can't just treat states as administrative appendages anymore.
Right. The federal balance is the default, and president's rule is an extreme exception.
Okay, so we've got a mechanism for war and rebellion and a mechanism for localized political collapse. But there is a third trigger. What if the crisis isn't military or political, but entirely about money?
Yes. The financial emergency under Article 360.
Yes, the wallet lockout.
Exactly. This is invoked if the president is satisfied that a situation has arisen threatening the financial stability or the credit of India.
Now, the mechanics here are fascinating because they kind of break the pattern. Like president's rule, it needs parliamentary approval within 2 months by a simple majority. But hang on, I'm looking at these notes. Once it's approved, it just goes on indefinitely. No repeat approvals needed.
You read that right. The duration rules are entirely unique. Once Parliament approves a financial emergency, it stays active indefinitely. It doesn't require Parliament to reapprove it every 6 months. It just stays on until the president specifically issues an order to revoke it.
That is so bizarre compared to the others. Why the lack of periodic review?
Well, the underlying logic is that severe economic crises like runaway inflation or sovereign debt defaults require long-term, painful stabilization measures.
Right.
Financial markets require certainty. If the government's emergency economic powers were subject to a highly politicized vote every 6 months, it could trigger further market panic and completely undermine the recovery. So they prioritized economic stability over legislative review here.
And the powers granted to achieve that stability are drastic. The center can direct states to observe strict canons of financial propriety, which basically means dictating state budgets. But the craziest part is the power over salaries.
Oh, absolutely. The president can direct a reduction in the salaries and allowances of anyone serving the union or the state.
And that explicitly includes the judges of the Supreme Court and high courts.
Which is a profound step. I mean, the independence of the judiciary is usually shielded by ensuring their salaries can't be touched. Allowing the executive to reduce their pay highlights just how catastrophic an Article 360 scenario is meant to be.
Plus, all state money bills can be reserved for the president's consideration. New Delhi essentially takes total control of the nation's treasury.
Total financial centralization.
But here's the ultimate exam trivia for you all. Despite this sweeping power, and despite India facing severe economic headwinds in the past, like the 1991 balance of payments crisis, a financial emergency has never been declared in India's history.
Never. It remains an entirely theoretical weapon.
Which brings us to an overarching structural question. When you look at the sheer magnitude of these three powers, especially that 1975 internal emergency, how does a democracy prevent itself from accidentally legislating its way into a dictatorship?
How do you stop the switch from getting stuck?
Exactly. And that brings us to the great safeguard. The disciplining of emergency power, mainly through the 44th Amendment Act of 1978.
To really appreciate the 44th Amendment, you have to look back at the Constituent Assembly debates. When these provisions were first drafted, there was fierce pushback.
Critics like K.T. Shah and Kunzru, right?
Yes. They warned that these provisions possessed the DNA of a police state. They were terrified the center was being handed the exact tools to crush state autonomy and civil liberties.
But Dr. B.R. Ambedkar defended it as a weapon of last resort, though he famously hoped it would remain a dead letter and never actually be used.
Right. But the irony is, history proved the critics' anxieties valid. It didn't stay a dead letter. The 1975 emergency showed that these mechanisms could be used in ways the framers didn't anticipate, leading to a massive suspension of civil liberties.
What's fascinating is the constitutional response to 1975. They didn't just delete the panic button. The logic that a state needs a survival mechanism still held true. So instead of abolishing the power, Parliament decided to heavily discipline it.
Yeah, the 44th Amendment in 1978 acted like a massive constitutional patch update. It fixed the procedural vulnerabilities.
Let's walk through those vital exam checkpoints introduced in 1978. First, the grounds for declaration.
Right. Originally, Article 352 used the delightfully vague phrase, internal disturbance.
Which is dangerously broad. A labor strike could be an internal disturbance.
Exactly. The 44th Amendment replaced that with the highly specific armed rebellion. People must literally be taking up arms against the state to justify an internal national emergency now.
Huge difference. It also changed how the president is advised. Pre-1978, the prime minister could just verbally advise the president to declare it.
Yeah, unilaterally.
But the 44th Amendment mandated written advice from the entire cabinet. No more unilateral orders. It has to be a documented decision of the highest executive body.
They also shortened the window for parliamentary approval for national emergencies from 2 months to 1 month, and introduced that requirement for renewal every 6 months that we talked about.
And it gave the Lok Sabha a way to actively pull the plug. If 1/10 of the members submit a written notice, a special sitting is held. And if they pass a resolution disapproving the emergency by a simple majority, the president is constitutionally bound to revoke it.
The executive can no longer sustain an emergency against the will of the people's representatives.
Yeah.
And when you couple that with the absolute protection of Articles 20 and 21 and the 1980 Minerva Mills case,
which allowed courts to strike down bad faith proclamations.
Exactly. The cage around these emergency powers was immensely fortified.
So let's do a rapid fire consolidation for everyone taking notes. 3 emergencies: national, 352, President's Rule, 356, financial, 360.
Got it.
All 3 turn the Federation unitary, but only the national emergency requires a special majority and suspends fundamental rights.
Right. Simple majority for the other 2.
And timelines. President's Rule has a hard 3-year max limit. A financial emergency goes on indefinitely without repeat approvals.
Perfect summary. The key takeaway is that emergency power is no longer absolute. It must answer to Parliament via the 44th Amendment and to the courts via bon mot.
It's a masterful piece of legal architecture. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Something beyond the legal text.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If the central government holds this massive unitary trump card in its back pocket at all times, how does the mere existence of Part 8 silently shape the day-to-day negotiations and power dynamics between the center and the states, even when there is no emergency?
That's the shadow of the future in political science. The states always know that structural capacity for a takeover is there.
Exactly. The threat of the switch might be just as influential as actually flipping it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the emergency provisions. To everyone tackling those competitive exams, keep the logic behind these timelines fresh in your mind. Use these mechanics as your secret weapon, and best of luck with your prep. Keep analyzing the structures around you, and we'll see you next time.